The cost of living in Portugal has gotten to such a point that I don't think that I can personally say that Portugal is the place to be anymore. Well, it's almost like that old Outcast song, in the place to be, but not to be at the same. It's a great place to be, but unfortunately, there are some major downsides now. I'm Rafael Di Furia. This is another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter, and roll that intro. Like many episodes of Not Your Average Globetrotter, I'm going to be speaking about things in a very general sense, and I'm going to be painting with a very wide brush. If you're looking for a video that's talking about specific figures, how much does this cost, how much do specific things cost when it comes to the cost of living in Portugal, in the words of the great Jedi Master Obi-Wan Kenobi, this is not the video you are looking for. I'm just here to speak about my perspective as somebody who's been living abroad for more than 16 years, and to speak about things from a boots-on-the-ground experience, from what I've been looking at. So, let me just get straight into this. Why am I making this video? Recently, I was contacted about a speaking engagement in another part of Europe for a private event, and okay, if I'm going, I may as well go for potentially like a couple days, take in the sights. It's not a secret where I'm going. If I end up going there, I'll make a video about it. And when traveling, though, a lot of people look at museums and they look at attractions, statues, cathedrals, and this and that and the other. Me, I'm a little different. I look at food. I mean, of course, not your average globetrotter. This is what we do here. And on top, I also look at the cost of living and what the realities are of living in a place. Where do locals go? What do locals do? What are those things? Again, like the sign says, not your average globetrotter. There's a reason for this. I don't travel in the normal ways that people normally travel. And of course, recently I've been talking about how the cost of living has been going up here. And really, I was actually a bit more surprised about how much it had gone up more when I looked at some of the cost of rent and certain things. And yes, in many ways, when you're looking at certain parts of Northern Europe, that the cost of living will be more there. But when we're talking about rentals for apartments, we're talking about Northern European prices in Southern Europe. But this is a really, really, really big problem, because in Portugal, the minimum salary, the minimum monthly income that a person would get would be less than half of what a person in many Northern European countries might get. So, how does this kind of all even out? And this, of course, brings me back to a point that I've made so many times about Portugal, Southern Europe, Italy, just generally speaking, is that if you are earning an income from abroad, that it's a really interesting, or at least it's been a really interesting place to consider to make your home. Because if you are able to live in a place and lower your expenses, then you'll have the opportunity to put more money on the side at the end of the day. But if the cost of living is approaching what it is going to be in a much more expensive, a much more costly part of the continent, then do you still have that same reason there? And especially taking into account how NHR is no longer available to at least the vast majority of new immigrants. Of course, this comes with an asterisk for maybe a tiny minority of individuals being possibly eligible to be able to still get in on it. And then even if you might potentially be eligible, if you actually get accepted, it's a different thing, but I'm not going to go into that in this episode. And then on top, golden visas being canceled, not canceled, maybe canceled, kind of canceled, sort of canceled, possibly canceled, but totally canceled, but maybe not. It leaves a lot of people wondering if it's going to be a solid choice to make, because you may be interested in it now, but how are things going to look like in a few days, in a few weeks, a few months, or even a few years from now? And then even for the people who were able to get in on the NHR, we're talking about a tax incentive that is only good for up to 10 years. And then after that, you go into the normal regime. So there are going to be a lot of people who just in general won't find themselves invested for the long term in the country. So personally, I'm very curious what things will look like as time rolls on and more people kind of, I guess you could say, age out of NHR or kind of have spent enough time here. Will they continue to stay here, or will it get to such a level that it will no longer be sustainable for them? So if you're talking about Portugal, a country where many people have come specifically for the financial incentives, for the tax incentives, is it really the place that has the same value as it did before? And this is one of the reasons why I was saying at the beginning, maybe it's not the place to be anymore, but it's still the place to be, because Portugal is overall a wonderful place to live in many ways. if you have an income, but talking about income, I'll get into that in just a second here. But if you are on a fixed income, but your cost of living and your taxation, because yes, your Social Security could be taxed here in Portugal, and in the vast majority of cases of individuals who I know who are living here on Social Security, that's the case for them. Just before we get into the next section, I do want to say a quick thank you to those of you who helped to make this project possible on a monthly basis through rafaeldifuria.com/Patreon, or the thanks button here on YouTube and rafaeldifuria.com/support, as well as a huge thank you to those of you who share these videos, who like these videos, and who are subscribed to the channel. They all very much help this project to be able to continue going on. So really, it does mean a lot, and let's get back into the rest of the episode. So if you're not specifically coming to the country because of the country and just because of what's offered there, then is it still worthwhile staying there or even considering to move there? I mean, this is why a lot of people are now looking at places like Spain and even actually a place that I specifically a few years ago would have said maybe not to look at. Things are changing, and there are incentives that are starting to become very interesting for people who are thinking about a life abroad. Greece is another country that I know has become interesting to a number of people, and even in places like Albania and Romania. And in places like those last two specifically, the cost of living there is going to probably be much, much, much less than what you might find in most of Western Europe to begin with. But of course, like I've said in so many episodes, it's really important to go to a place where it's the right fit for you, to go towards a place, to not leave from a place, but also to look at the reasoning why you want to be there. Do you want to be there specifically because it is that place, or are you leaving your country and just looking for the cheapest place to be? This definitely affects your experience. This definitely affects what you will see and what you will go through at the end of the day when it comes to your life abroad. And for many people, they're just looking for a jump off point to be able to travel. That's one way of moving abroad. Personally, I don't think it's necessarily the most ideal way, but nothing wrong with it. It might not be the best in some ways for me, but for other people, it actually very well could be the best way for them. And like I was talking about before, if you're going to be living in Portugal, earning a Portuguese salary, but having Northern European expenditures, is that so realistic? I mean, when you are looking at a country to move abroad to, you of course have to look at why people are staying or why people are leaving. And in a country like Portugal, also Italy as well, Spain, I guess also falls within this as well, that you are looking at countries where a lot of young professionals are leaving. But why are they leaving? What opportunities are they seeking, and what are the opportunities that they are thinking that they're not finding or know they're not finding in their country of origin? There's also the flip side to this whole argument, that when you are going to a place that has a higher minimum salary, that the cost of living is generally going to be more expensive. So this kind of maybe nowadays in 2024 doesn't follow some of the same rules that it did in the past, especially here in Portugal, just because to me, I'm not saying that it is, but Portugal looks currently like a little bit of a bubble in some ways. And I can only wonder what is going to happen over the next years. Again, talking about how inflation has hit the country like the rest of the world, as well as what has happened in the country with so many individuals wanting to invest in the country and the prices rising, locals who are owning apartments, raising the rents and putting rents at a higher price, expecting for a foreigner to come in and pay that price rather than a local to come in and pay that price. So maybe if you're in a point in your life where you are on a fixed income, or you are working as a digital nomad and you know roughly what your income is going to be, where is the place that presents the best value to you? Where is the place that presents the best lifestyle to you? And if you can find both of those in Portugal, then that's amazing. But when we're talking about even a city like where I live, Braga, and comparing it to European cities that would be part of, say, like Northern Europe, and when we're seeing that what your monthly expenditure could be versus what you're going to be earning, you really have to think about that. And so I can say that I am not surprised that nowadays there are maybe so many people who are really looking at leaving the country, both foreigners and locals alike. The big question, though, comes down to if you are at a point in your life where you are needing to further your career and you're having to even maintain a career, then what are your options going to be in another part of the European Union? If we're talking about a place like maybe the Netherlands or Belgium or some parts of Belgium or some parts of Germany, yes, maybe you will find bubbles where people might be working in a company that speak predominantly English, or even in Finland, maybe even Sweden, for example. There's actually a Finnish camera store that sells used analog cameras. And from what I've heard from their social media, it seems as though most of their meetings and a lot of their internal communication ends up being in English, just because now so many people are from abroad that seem to maybe even outnumber the number of locals who are working there. And also on top, Finnish is not one of the easiest languages to learn. So when you are thinking about where to go, generally speaking, if you really want to be solid in a career, you're going to have to gain some level of fluency in a language. This is why I've been preaching since the very early episodes of Not Your Average Globetrotter about learn the language. I'm not saying that in every single case you have to be perfectly fluent. However, the better that your language skills are, the further that you have the potential to go in some ways, because having the ability to express yourself and the ability to communicate and connect with others can help an individual to allow the person sitting across the table from them the value that you bring to their business, to their company, to whatever it is that you're doing. Or do you want to make your own company? Do you want to form your own company? What are the restrictions there? What are the incentives to do so? What would maybe say it's better to work as a freelancer? Like everywhere else, these are the factors you have to take into consideration. And again, looking at the cost of living in Portugal presents both a problem, but I would say also an opportunity for those who are thinking about where do they want to make their life and where do they want to settle. In some ways and in some careers and some fields, there are going to be opportunities for an individual in Portugal. Will there be more opportunities elsewhere? Quite possibly. Is that guaranteed? No, nothing in this life is guaranteed moving forward in the future. That's never been the case. The future is always this blankness in front of us, where the only thing that we ever truly know that we have is the moment that we're living in now and every minute that came before it. So is there the chance that the cost of living could come down here? Possibly. But I mean, if we look at general trends for cost of living and cost of goods and services and all of these things, they don't tend to really tank all that much. They tend to just keep on going up as time goes on. Of course, it can happen. Nothing is impossible. Of course, when it comes down to cost of living, it's not just your apartment that you're living in, but it's also your groceries and various other things. And yes, some of these things will cost more in Northern Europe. But we are also seeing that there are some things that may actually end up costing the same. Even I was comparing cost of restaurants here in Braga versus a few different cities across Northern Europe, just because when I started going down this whole rabbit hole of looking at one city and then another city and another city. The cities don't really matter. I'm just talking again in a very general sense about Southern Europe, Northern Europe, what I'm seeing here versus what I'm seeing up there. And even one of my favorite cost indexes to look at across the globe is what I like to call the burger index, not the McDonald's index, the Big Mac index, but the general cost of a burger. What is the normal cost of the people's food? You got to know these things. Or what is like a normal cheap meal? And I would say, actually, funny enough, in Braga, there's not a ton of options for just kind of cheap places to just go. Of course, you have places where you can go get snacks and so on, but I'm not necessarily talking about like sandwiches or things that maybe I would call a meal, but low cost meal. Some of those things are starting to go kind of the way of the dinosaur in some ways. Do they exist? Of course they exist. But I feel as though, based on my personal experience, having spent time also in Northern Europe, that there are more options, even just kind of what are the normal foods that people eat in general, and more places that you can go for a quick, simple snack just to grab and go. But a lot of the dining experiences, specifically here in Braga, are more sit down sorts of things. Yeah, there are places where you can go for a quick bite, but it's kind of like literally just a fried snack of some sort and not a cheap meal, or at least not what I would personally call a cheap meal. But then even looking at certain things like transportation, public transportation, yes, the price is lower here, but when you're looking at your overall expenditure, things start to get very close at the end of the month, at least with the things that I've been looking for, even furniture. There's not a lot of a used market for furniture here, at least from what I've seen. People, even I know, a lot of expats are like, hey, where are the used furniture stores and this and that? It's not like they don't exist, but even the prices of the places that I have seen are not cheap whatsoever. Granted, you can find really solid furniture that's used, but then you start looking at IKEA and IKEA starts looking interesting. I mean, unfortunately, it's one of those places that's becoming hard to avoid. And the secondhand market in this country, I would say, is not quite as vibrant as some other parts of the world. And when you start looking at Northern Europe, where reusing and recycling and secondhand markets are much more within the kind of cultural norm as you might find in, say, like the US, for example, you start seeing that when you're looking for certain things, the final cost is not going to be as crazy expensive as what you might find elsewhere. Again, more specifically here in Portugal. But, of course, I'm Rafael Di Furia. This has been another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Thank you all so much for joining me for this episode. And especially thanks to those of you who help this project to keep going on a monthly basis through RafaelDiFuria.com/Patreon, Patreon.com/RafaelDiFuria, RafaelDiFuria.com/support. The thanks button here on YouTube. Also, especially thank you to those of you who like these episodes and share them with your friends. Those very much help this channel, as well as to those of you who subscribe. Everything in all of those different ways helps. Of course, I'm Rafael Di Furia. Stay safe and healthy out there, and I'll see y'all next time for another episode of Not Your Average Globetrotter. Later.